They say the cold is the quietest way to die. But for James, the silence wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. Stranded on a desolate highway, with nothing but a broken-down sedan and 2 shivering children, she was 5 minutes away from freezing to death. She didn't pray for a miracle. She just prayed the kids wouldn't wake up to feel the pain. Then the headlights cut through the dark. He stepped out of the shadows, a man who commanded fear in the hearts of killers, yet looked at her freezing family with something else entirely. When the Mafia boss saw the tears frozen on her 4-year-old's cheek, he didn't ask for her name. He turned to his men, his voice shaking the earth, and asked one thing: who did this? This is the story of how a waitress met the devil and found out he was the only angel left. The tips in James's apron pocket jingled a pitiful sound. $7.40. That was the grand total for an 8-hour shift at Miller's Roadhouse on a Tuesday. It wasn't enough to buy a gallon of milk and a box of cereal, let alone pay what was waiting for her at home. James Jenkins wiped the counter with a rag that smelled of bleach and old coffee. She was 26, but the dark circles under her hazel eyes made her look 30. Her hair, a light chestnut brown, was pulled back in a fraying, messy bun, escaping in wisps that framed a face hardened by 2 years of bad luck. "Hey, James, you still here? The storm's getting bad," called out Old Man Miller from the kitchen. "Just finishing up Earl," she shouted back, untying her apron. She ran out to her car, a 2011 Honda Civic that had more rust than paint. The heater had died 3 weeks ago, and the passenger window was stuck a 1/4 inch open, creating a permanent whistle of freezing air. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her landlord, Mr. Henderson. James's stomach twisted. She knew what those calls meant. She drove carefully over the icy patches of Route 9, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When she pulled into the driveway of the small, dilapidated duplex she rented, her heart stopped. Her belongings weren't inside. A soggy cardboard box sat on the porch snow. A black garbage bag was next to it. The lock on the front door had been changed. The shiny brass knob mocked the peeling paint of the doorframe. She scrambled out of the car, slipping on the ice. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She pounded on the door. "Mr. Henderson. Please, I have the money coming next week. Mr. Henderson." The door opened, but only as far as the security chain allowed. A face peered out. Not Henderson, but a hired heavy. A guy with a neck tattoo and eyes devoid of sympathy. "Henderson sold the building this morning," the man grunted. "New management wants the place gutted. You're out. It's 10 degrees below zero." James screamed, the wind whipping her hair into her face. "I have 2 children at the babysitter. You can't do this. Read the lease. Month to month. 30 days notice was given. You just didn't read the mail." The door slammed shut. The bolt clicked. James stood there, the snow beginning to fall harder, turning into white sheets that blurred the world. She had missed the notice, how between double shifts and taking care of Leo and Mia. She barely slept, let alone read mail. Panic, cold and sharp, set in. She grabbed the garbage bag, clothes mostly, and threw it in the back seat. She had to get the kids. Picking up Leo 7 and Mia 4 from the neighbor's house was a blur of shame. She couldn't tell Mrs. Gable she was homeless. She just smiled, thanked her, and buckled the kids into the freezing car. "Mommy, it's cold," Mia whimpered, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. "I know, baby. We're going on an adventure." James lied, her voice trembling. "We're going to a hotel, a fancy one." "With a pool?" Leo asked, blowing on his hands. Maybe, James choked out. She drove aimlessly for an hour. The cheap motels were full or too expensive. The storm upgraded from a snowfall to a full-blown blizzard. Visibility dropped to 0. The Honda's engine began to sputter. Please, she begged the universe. Not now. But the universe wasn't listening. With a violent shudder, the car died on a secluded stretch of road near the dense pine forests miles from the nearest town. The silence that followed was heavy. "Mom?" Leo asked, fear creeping into his voice. "It's okay," James said, unbuckling her seatbelt. She took off her coat and wrapped it around Mia. She took her spare work cardigan and wrapped it around Leo's legs. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The temperature inside the car plummeted. Frost began to form on the inside of the windows. James huddled in the front seat, wearing only her thin waitress uniform. She couldn't feel her toes. She turned to look at the kids. They had stopped shivering. That was bad. That was the danger zone. "Stay awake," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. "Leo, tell me about your drawing." "I'm sleepy, Mum," Leo murmured. James opened the door. She had to flag down help. She stepped out into the roaring wind, the snow biting her skin like needles. She stood in the middle of the black road, waving her arms at the darkness, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Help us," she screamed, though the wind stole the sound. "Please, someone." She was about to collapse her legs, giving way to the numbness, when a pair of blinding LED beams cut through the white void. Dominic Nico Moretti hated the cold. It reminded him of the cell in solitary confinement where he'd spent his 22nd birthday. Now at 34, he owned half the politicians in the state and enough real estate to build a small country. Yet he was currently stuck in a blizzard in an armored Cadillac Escalade. "Boss, the road is blocked," his driver. Silas grunted. "Visibility is crap. We should have taken the helicopter." "In this wind, we'd be a smudge on the side of a mountain," Nico replied, looking out the tinted window. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit. He was a man of sharp angles, high cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass and eyes the color of stormy seas. They were returning from a meeting with the triads upstate. It hadn't gone well. Nico was in a foul mood. "What is that?" Silas squinted, slowing the heavy SUV. Nico looked up. "Stop the car." "Boss, it's probably a trap. Ambush tactic. Fake a breakdown, block the road." "I said, stop the car." Nico didn't wait for Silas to open the door. He shoved it open, the wind instantly assaulting him. He stepped onto the asphalt, his hand instinctively hovering near the Sig Sauer tucked inside his blazer. In the middle of the road, illuminated by the headlights like a ghost, a woman was on her knees. She wasn't wearing a coat. Her uniform was thin, soaked through. She looked like she had already surrendered to the snow. Nico approached cautiously. As he got closer, he saw her face. Blue lips, skin pale as the snow. But her eyes, hazel and terrified, locked onto his. "Please," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "My babies." Nico froze. Babies. He looked past her to the rusted heap of a Honda Civic. The windows were completely iced over. He didn't think. He moved. "Silas! Get to the blankets now." Nico roared, his voice booming over the wind. He scooped James up. She was light, alarmingly fragile. He practically threw her into the back of the heated Escalade. "Stay there." He ran to the Honda. He wrenched the back door open. The sight hit him like a physical punch. 2 small children huddled together under a pile of thin clothes. The boy, Leo, was blue. The girl, Mia, wasn't moving. "Christ," Nico cursed. He unbuckled them with trembling efficiency. He grabbed the girl first, tucking her against his chest, shielding her from the wind with his cashmere coat. He grabbed the boy by the hand. "Come on, son. Move. You have to move." He hustled them into the Escalade. The sudden warmth of the SUV was overwhelming. Silas was already wrapping James in a thick wool blanket. Nico threw another over the children. James was shaking violently, her eyes rolling back. Are they... They're alive," Nico said, his voice dropping an octave. He looked at the children. The boy was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. The girl was starting to cry, a good sign. It meant she had the energy to do so. Nico looked at their clothes. Tattered sneakers, jeans that were too short. The woman's uniform had a name tag, James. Miller's Roadhouse. He looked at the woman. She wasn't just cold. She was malnourished. She was exhausted down to her soul. This wasn't just a car breakdown. This was a systematic failure of life. A dark volcanic rage bubbled up in Nico's chest. He wasn't a good man. He was a criminal. He killed people who crossed him. But he had a code. You don't hurt women, and you never ever let children suffer. He looked at James, who was trying to rub heat into her daughter's hands, ignoring her own frostbitten fingers. "Who put you out here?" Nico demanded. The intensity in the car sucked the air out of the room. James looked up, bewildered. "The car. It broke." "Not the car," Nico snarled. He gestured to the garbage bags he could see through the window of her Honda. "You have your life in bags. You have no coats. You're starving. Who did this to you?" "My landlord, Mr. Henderson. He evicted us tonight." Nico stared at her. "He put a woman and 2 children on the street in a blizzard." He said, "New management." Nico turned to Silas. The look in Nico's eyes was terrifying. It was the look he wore before a war started. "Silas," Nico said calmly, "get the license plate of her car. Call the cleanup crew to tow it. Then get me the name of the property owner for 42. "What's your address?" 42 Oak Street, James whispered. "Get me the name," Nico commanded, "and set a course for the manor. They aren't going to a hospital. Child services will separate them. They're coming with us." "Boss bringing civilians to the manor," Silas started. "Drive!" Nico roared. As the car pulled away, leaving the frozen Honda behind, Nico watched the woman. She had passed out from the sudden warmth, her head lolling against the leather seat. "Who did this?" Nico muttered to himself, looking at the sleeping boy. "I'm going to burn their world down." James woke up because of the smell. It wasn't bleach and grease. It was lavender cedarwood and clean linen. She shot up, gasping. Panic seized her chest. The last thing she remembered was the snow, the headlights, and the man with the eyes like storm clouds. She wasn't in her car. She was in a bed that was bigger than her entire apartment living room. The sheets were silk. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth across the room. "Leo, Mia!" she screamed, scrambling out of the bed. "Mommy!" The door flew open, and Leo ran in, followed by Mia. They were wearing oversized t-shirts that looked brand new and thick wool socks. They looked warm. They looked fed. "We had pancakes," Mia cheered, jumping onto the bed. "With blueberries, and the scary man has a dog." James grabbed them, pulling them into a tight hug, checking them for injuries. "Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" "No, Mrs. Jenkins. No one is going to hurt them." James looked up. Standing in the doorway was the man. Without the snow and the darkness, he was even more intimidating. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black turtleneck and dark trousers. He looked expensive. He looked dangerous. "Where am I?" James demanded, putting herself between him and the kids. "Who are you?" "You're in my home, north of the city," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "My name is Dominic. You can call me Nico." James's blood ran cold. She knew that name. Everyone in the hospitality industry in the state knew that name. Dominic Moretti. The newspapers called him a real estate mogul. The whispers in the back of the diner called him the Don of the East Coast. "Moretti," she whispered. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I see my reputation precedes me." "I need to leave," James said, standing up. Her legs wobbled. "Thank you for saving us. But we have to go." "Go where?" Nico asked, walking into the room. He moved with the silent grace of a predator. "To your car that's dead. To the apartment you were evicted from. To the street." "That's none of your business," James snapped. "It became my business when I had to thaw your daughter out of a block of ice." Nico retorted, his voice hard. "You have frostbite on your toes. Your son has a bronchial cough. You aren't going anywhere." "I am not a charity case," James said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I work hard. I had a bad run." Nico studied her. He liked her fire. Most people cowered before him. She was trembling like a leaf, but she stood her ground like a lioness protecting her cubs. "I know," Nico said softly. "I saw your hands. You've worked hard every day of your life." He walked over to a small table and poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. "But right now the roads are closed. The storm is worse. You stay here until it clears. That is not a request." James looked at the kids. Mia was bouncing on the bed, happy. Leo looked warm for the first time in months. She couldn't drag them back out there. She swallowed her pride. "Okay," she said. "Just until the storm clears, and I will pay you back. I can clean. I can cook." Nico almost laughed. He had a staff of 20 people to do that. "We'll discuss payment later." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Your husband. Where is he?" James flinched. The pain was 3 years old, but it still felt fresh. "He died 3 years ago. Name, Jack Jenkins." Nico's hand froze on the doorknob. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. Nico froze. "Jack Jenkins," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the name on his tongue. The accountant James frowned. "He was a bookkeeper," she said, "for a small construction firm." Why Nico didn't answer right away? He turned toward the window where snow lashed against the glass like handfuls of salt. His reflection stared back at him. Sharp eyes, rigid jaw, a man trained to reveal nothing. "No reason," he said at last. "You should rest, James. Dinner is at 7. Before she could ask anything else, he walked out and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch echoed down the hallway. Nico stopped a few steps away and leaned against the marble wall. For a moment he just stood there, breathing hard, as if he'd been punched in the chest. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. Silas answered on the second ring. "Boss, get me the Russo files from 3 years ago," Nico said quietly. "Everything, especially the hit on the accountant who supposedly disappeared with their books." There was a pause. "You mean Jack Jenkins?" Silas asked. "That guy was a rat. Russo's clipped him and spread the story that he ran off with 2 million. Nico glanced back at the closed guest room door. "Yeah," he said. "Funny thing is, I just found his wife and kids freezing in a snowbank. No food, no money. Evicted over $600. Silas swore under his breath. "That doesn't make sense." No, Nico agreed. "It doesn't. If Jack Jenkins had stolen millions, his family wouldn't have been living paycheck to paycheck. They wouldn't have been one missed rent payment away from homelessness, which meant someone had lied." "And if the Russos find out they're here?" Silas asked. Nico's voice hardened. "Then this storm will be the least of our problems." He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with portraits of long-dead Morettis who had ruled with bullets and bribes. Nico had grown up under those eyes. He knew what happened to people who became inconvenient. He had planned to help James give her some cash and send her back to whatever life she had left. That plan was gone. Now he was standing on the edge of a war he thought had ended years ago. He entered his study and locked the door behind him. The room smelled of old books and polished leather. He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a heavy black pistol. He checked the chamber. Loaded. "Who did this?" he murmured. The answer came easily. The Russos. And this time, they were going to pay. Two days passed inside the Moretti estate. For James, it felt like living inside a museum that doubled as a bunker. Every surface gleamed. Every hallway echoed. Every window was made of thick, bulletproof glass. Something Leo had tested by banging his toy truck against it until she nearly fainted. Nico had only laughed. She tried to make herself as small as possible. She folded towels that were already perfectly stacked. She rearranged books no one would ever read. She offered to help in the kitchen, but Rosa, the stern head cook, waved her away. "Sit," the woman insisted. "If you burn yourself, the boss will kill me." So James sat and worried. She couldn't relax. Not in a house where men with guns stood at every entrance. Not when she didn't know why. Nico suddenly spent hours locked in his office, speaking in low, angry Italian. When she looked at him, she saw two different men. One was gentle. He sat cross-legged on the floor with Leo helping him build a model train track. He listened patiently as Emma recited her spelling words. He made sure James always had tea before bed. The other man paced the library at night. Phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp enough to cut glass. His eyes went distant, calculating. Dangerous. That man scared her. On the third evening, the storm finally broke. The wind died down. The clouds thinned. Moonlight spilled across the snow-covered grounds, turning everything silver and unreal. James stood by the window watching. For the first time since the night they'd broken down on the highway, the world felt quiet. But somewhere in the depths of the mansion, Nico Moretti was preparing for something far from peaceful. And James had a growing feeling that her family was standing at the center of it. James found Nico in the kitchen. He was making espresso, his sleeves rolled up, revealing scars on his forearms that told stories she didn't want to hear. "You can't sleep," he stated, not asking. He handed her a cup. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," James admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Rich men don't save waitresses for free, Nico, and criminals don't house witnesses." Nico leaned against the marble island, crossing his arms. "I told you, you aren't a witness. You're a guest." "My husband," James said, her voice shaking slightly. "You asked about Jack. You knew him." Nico's expression darkened. I knew of him. He worked for the Russo family. They run the shipping yards down in the harbor. He was just an accountant, James insisted. He did taxes, payroll. He didn't know about the other stuff. James, Nico said, gently stepping closer. The Russos claimed Jack stole $2 million in bonds before he died. That's why they killed him. They made it look like a car accident, but it was a hit. James gasped, the cup rattling in the saucer. Stole Jack wouldn't steal a pack of gum. We were saving for a down payment on a house. If he had $2 million, why did he die leaving us with nothing but debt? That's what I've been asking myself, Nico murmured. He studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. He saw only exhaustion and grief. If he didn't take the money, then he took something else. Something the Russos wanted back badly enough to kill for. He didn't take anything, James cried. He just came home that night pale as a sheet. He told me he found a mistake in the books, a ghost ledger. He said he was going to fix it. Nico's eyes widened. A ghost ledger. He said he put the proof in the only safe place he knew. He left the house to go to the police, and he never came back. Nico swore softly in Italian. He set his cup down and grabbed James's shoulders. His grip was firm, urgent. James, listen to me. The Russos didn't kill him for money. They killed him because he found their bribe book. The list of every judge, cop, and politician they own. That book is worth more than $2 million. It's worth the whole city. I don't have it, James whispered, terrified by the intensity in his storm-colored eyes. I know you don't, but they think you might, or they think you know where it is. Nico paused, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, a gesture so tender it shocked them both. Did he give you anything before he left? A key, a note, nothing. He just hugged the kids. He gave Leo his old calculator and Mia his teddy bear. Nico froze. The bear. The one the girl carries everywhere. Yes, it was Jack's when he was a baby. He called it Mr. Penny. Nico turned and ran toward the living room. James chased after him. Nico, what are you doing? They burst into the living room, where the kids were asleep on the massive sofa, the TV playing cartoons on mute. Mia was clutching the tattered, one-eyed bear. Nico knelt. He gently, with the precision of a surgeon, took the bear from the sleeping child's arms. He turned it over. Along the back seam, the stitching was slightly different. A lighter thread. Jack was a bookkeeper, Nico whispered. He knew how to close a seam. He pulled a pocket knife. James put her hand over her mouth. With a quick slice, Nico opened the bear. He reached inside the stuffing and pulled out a small black USB drive. James felt her knees give way. Nico caught her with one arm, pulling her against his chest. He didn't steal money, Nico said, holding the drive up to the light. He stole their death warrant. They killed him for a flash drive, James sobbed into his chest, and they will kill to get it back. Nico said, his voice turning into that low, dangerous growl. Silas. His driver appeared instantly from the shadows of the hallway. Lock down the perimeter, Nico ordered. Full security protocols, and get the encryption team ready. We just found the Russo's heart, and I'm going to carve it out. He looked down at James. She was terrified, but she was looking at him, not away from him. You're safe, he promised her, wiping a tear from her face. I possess the only army in this city that the Russos fear. As long as you are with me, they cannot touch you. For the first time in 3 years, James believed a promise from a man. But as she looked at the USB drive, she realized the blizzard outside was nothing compared to the storm that was coming for them. The peace of the manor was shattered at 3 a.m. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the specific rhythmic thud-thud-thud of silenced rounds hitting the exterior walls. Nico was in James's room before she even fully woke up. He was dressed in tactical gear, black vest holsters, boots. He looked like a soldier of war. "Up!" he commanded. "Now!" James scrambled out of bed, grabbing her robe. "What? What is it? They found us. How? It doesn't matter how. Get the children." James ran into the adjoining room. Leo and Mia were groggy, confused. "Mummy, we're playing a game," James said, her voice high and tight. "We have to hide, like hide and seek, quiet as mice." Nico was there, lifting Mia into his left arm, while keeping his right hand free near his hip. "Follow me. Do not stop. Do not look out the windows." They moved into the hallway. The house was alive with activity. Men in suits were running past them, carrying assault rifles. The sound of glass shattering echoed from the downstairs foyer. "They breached the front gate," Silas reported, appearing at the top of the stairs, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "It's a hit squad. Maybe 20 of them. Heavily armed." "Get them to the vault," Nico ordered. "I'll hold the hallway." "Nico, no!" James screamed, grabbing his arm. Nico stopped. The chaos of the gunfight roared downstairs, shouts, automatic fire, the crashing of expensive furniture. But in that hallway, time seemed to suspend. Nico looked at James. He saw the waitress who had stood in the snow to save her kids. He saw the woman who had invaded his cold, empty life and filled it with the smell of cheap shampoo and courage. "Go with Silas," Nico said, pressing his forehead against hers for a split second. "I have to finish this. If they get past me, they get to you, and I will burn in hell before I let that happen." He pushed her toward Silas and turned back towards the stairs. Silas hustled them down a service corridor, behind a false panel in the wall, and down a spiraling metal staircase. They ended up in a concrete room, a panic room. It was stocked with water screens and cots. The heavy steel door slammed shut, locking with a definitive clunk. "Is he going to die?" Leo asked, his voice small. "No," Silas said, checking the monitors on the wall. "The boss doesn't die. He's the one who does the killing." James stared at the screens. They showed black and white feeds of the house. She saw the intruders' men in ski masks moving through the kitchen, the living room. And she saw Nico. He wasn't hiding. He was hunting. She watched on the grainy screen as Nico moved through the shadows of his own home. He was terrifyingly efficient. He engaged 3 men in the library. It wasn't like the movies. It was fast, brutal, and over in seconds. James covered Leo's eyes, but she couldn't look away. "He's protecting us," Mia whispered, hugging Mr. Penny, unaware that the bear had caused all of this. "Yes, baby," James wept. "He is." Suddenly, the feed in the hallway cut to static. Then the living room feed died. One by one, the cameras were being shot out. "They're blinding us," Silas muttered, drawing his weapon and aiming it at the panic room door. "Stay behind me." Silence fell over the room. It was heavy, suffocating. James held her children so tight her arms burned. She prayed to a god she thought had abandoned her. "Don't let him die. Please don't let him die." 10 minutes passed, then 20, then a heavy knock on the steel door. 3 distinct raps. Silas lowered his gun. "That's the code." He spun the wheel and opened the door. Nico stood there. He was a mess. His white shirt was stained red, whether his blood or theirs James couldn't tell. He was breathing hard, sweat matting his dark hair to his forehead. He held a gun loosely in his right hand. "It's done," Nico said, his voice raspy. James didn't think. She handed the kids to Silas and launched herself at Nico. She collided with him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Nico grunted in phone, but caught her, burying his face in her neck. He smelled of gunpowder and copper. "You idiot!" she sobbed. "You idiot!" "I told you." Nico wheezed, pulling back to look at her. "I don't break promises." He winced, clutching his side. James looked down. His shirt was soaked through with fresh blood just above his hip. "You're shot," she gasped. "Grazed." Nico lied. He looked at Silas, the leader. Before he died, he talked. "And?" Silas asked. "It wasn't just the Russos," Nico said, his eyes hardening into flint. "They had help. Someone inside the real estate commission. Someone who knew exactly where James lived and when she was evicted. Someone who tipped them off that she was here." "Who?" James asked. "Your landlord," Nico spat. "Henderson. He sold you out for 10 grand. Nico straightened up, ignoring his wound. The adrenaline was fading, but the rage was fueling him now. "Pack the bags," Nico said to Silas. "The house is compromised. We can't stay here." "Where are we going?" James asked, trembling. Nico looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive determination. "We're going to the city," Nico said. "I'm done playing defense. We're going to pay Mr. Henderson a visit, and then I'm going to take the Russo family apart, brick by brick." He took James's hand. His grip was bloody but warm. "You asked who did this," Nico said. "Now we know, and God help them." The sun had not yet risen when the black SUV pulled up to a modest siding-clad house on the outskirts of town. It was the home of Mr. Henderson, the landlord who had evicted James into a blizzard. Nico sat in the back, a fresh bandage wrapped tightly around his waist beneath his shirt. The pain was sharp, grounding him. James sat next to him, her face pale, but her jaw set in a line of grim determination. The children were safe with trusted guards at a secondary location, a penthouse in the city that Nico owned under a shell corporation. "You don't have to go in," Nico said, checking the slide of his pistol. "I can handle Henderson." "No," James said, her voice steady. He looked me in the eye and told me it was new management. He watched me buckle my children into a broken car in freezing weather. "I need to see him." Nico nodded. He admired her steel. "Stay behind me." Silas kicked the front door in. The wood splintered with a deafening crack. Mr. Henderson was in his bathrobe, sitting at his kitchen table, counting a stack of cash. He jumped up, scattering $100 bills across the linoleum. "What? Who's there?" Henderson shrieked. When he saw Nico, the blood drained from his face. He knew who Dominic Moretti was. Everyone did. But when he saw James stepping out from behind Nico, his eyes bulged. "Mrs. Jenkins," he stammered. I thought—" "You thought we froze?" James asked, stepping forward. The rage she had been suppressing for days finally boiled over. "You thought we'd be dead by morning and you could spend your blood money in peace. I didn't have a choice," Henderson cried, backing up against the refrigerator. "The Russos, they came to me. They said they knew I had a tenant named Jenkins. They offered me 10 grand to kick you out. They said they just wanted to talk to you once you were on the road. And you believed them." Nico stepped in, his voice low and vibrating with menace. "You sent a woman and 2 toddlers into a blizzard for $10,000. Nico picked up a stack of the cash from the table. He looked at it with disgust, then threw it in Henderson's face. That's the price of a human life to you. Please, Mr. Moretti. Henderson wept, sliding down the fridge door. I'll give it back. I'll give it all back. I don't want your money, Nico growled. He leaned down, grabbing Henderson by the collar of his bathrobe. I want to know where the Russos are operating from right now. The headquarters, not the shipping yard, the place where the brothers meet. The warehouse on 5th, Henderson spluttered. The old textile factory. They're meeting there tonight to celebrate. They think you're dead. They heard about the attack on your manor. Nico dropped him. He turned to Silas. Tie him up. Call the police. Tell them we have an accomplice to attempted murder and conspiracy. Nico looked at James. Let's go. We have a meeting to crash. The takedown. The warehouse on 5th Avenue was a fortress, but Nico didn't plan on storming it with guns blazing. Not this time. He had something more powerful than bullets. He had the USB drive. While Silas drove toward the police precinct, Nico sat in the back of the SUV with a laptop. He had decrypted the drive. It was worse than he thought. It wasn't just bribes. It was evidence of human trafficking, drug smuggling routes, and murders going back a decade. James, Nico said, looking at the screen. Your husband. He was a hero. He documented everything. Dates, times, coordinates. He built a case that can put the entire Russo bloodline in prison for life. James looked at the glowing screen, tears welling in her eyes. He didn't die for nothing. No, Nico said softly. He didn't. Nico made a call, not to a hitman, but to the district attorney, one of the few honest men left in the city. This is Moretti, Nico said into the phone. I'm sending you a file. It's the Russo ledger. I want warrants issued within the hour. And I want the SWAT team at the textile factory on 5th. I'll be waiting for you there. He hung up. You're calling the police? James asked, shocked. I thought you were a criminal, Nico smirked. I am. But the Russos broke the rules. They touched civilians. They touched children. In my world, that makes them garbage. And sometimes you let the law take out the trash. An hour later, James and Nico watched from the safety of the SUV, parked a block away, as armored trucks surrounded the warehouse. They watched as flashbangs illuminated the night. They watched as the Russo brothers, men who had terrorized the city for 20 years, were dragged out in handcuffs, shouting and cursing. Nico watched with cold satisfaction. James watched with a sense of immense, crushing relief. It's over, she whispered. Nico took her hand. The danger is over. But we still have things to settle. The silence in the back of the armored Cadillac on the drive back from the warehouse was different from the silence in the blizzard. That first silence had been cold, filled with the dread of death. This silence was heavy, thick with the adrenaline crash of survival. James sat next to Nico, her hand trembling slightly in her lap. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were miles behind them now. The Russo brothers were in cuffs. The corrupt landlord Henderson was singing like a canary in an interrogation room. The ghost ledger that Jack had died to protect was now the nail in the coffin of an empire. It was over. Nico stared out the window, watching the city lights blur. He looked exhausted. The invincibility he wore like a suit of armor had cracked, revealing a man who had been carrying the weight of a war for far too long. James reached out her fingers, brushing against his bruised knuckles. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was tight, desperate, as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth. It's done, he murmured, his voice rough. Is it James asked softly. The Russos are gone. But what happens now? Nico didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Now, he said slowly, you are free. No one is hunting you. No debts. No threats. The word free hung in the air between them, tasting bitter. James looked away. Freedom meant she could go back to her life, but she didn't have a life to go back to. And looking at the sharp, handsome profile of the man beside her, she realized with a terrifying jolt that she didn't want a life that didn't include him. 2 weeks later, the transition from target to civilian was harder than James expected. The Moretti estate, once a fortress under siege, had returned to its quiet, imposing grandeur. The broken windows were replaced. The security teams retreated to the perimeter, invisible ghosts guarding the gates. James and the children were still living in the guest wing, but the dynamic had shifted. The urgency was gone, replaced by a polite, aching distance. Nico was busy. He spent his days in meetings with lawyers, liquidating the assets he had seized from the Russos, ensuring that the reward money for Jack's evidence, a staggering $2 million, was deposited cleanly into a trust for Leo and Mia. He was being perfect. He was being a gentleman, and it was breaking James's heart. She found him late one Tuesday night in the library. The fire was dying in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the rows of leather-bound books. He was pouring a glass of amber whiskey, his tie undone, his posture slumped. Silas says the papers are ready, James said from the doorway. Nico straightened up, masking his exhaustion instantly. He turned, forcing a small, polite smile. Yes, the trust fund is active, and I've had my real estate team scout 3 properties for you. Safe neighborhoods, good schools, fully paid off. James walked into the room. She was wearing a simple silk robe he had bought for her, her hair loose around her shoulders. You've planned everything out? It's the least I can do, Nico said, taking a sip of his drink. He didn't look at her. Jack was a hero. You deserve a fresh start, a normal life, far away from all of this. He gestured vaguely to the room to himself. Normal, James repeated. She walked closer until she was standing just on the other side of the heavy oak desk. Is that what you think? I want to take the money and run. It's what you should want, Nico said, his voice hardening slightly. James, look at me. Look at my life. I have enemies. I have blood on my hands. I solved your problem with violence because that is the only language I speak. You are a mother. You need PTA meetings and soccer practice, not armed guards and panic rooms. You think I'm fragile? She accused, her voice rising. No. Nico snapped, slamming his glass down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I think you are the strongest thing I have ever met. But you are light, James, and I am not. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them, his expression tortured. These past weeks, he whispered, having you here, hearing Leo laugh in the hallway, watching Mia try to braid Silas's hair, waking up knowing you were safe under my roof. It was the only peace I have ever known. Then why are you pushing us away? James asked, tears pricking her eyes. Because I will ruin you, Nico said. The confession ripped from his throat. Eventually, the darkness of my world will touch you, and I couldn't survive that. It's better if you go now, while you can. He turned away, unable to look at her. He was giving her the out. He was opening the cage door. James stared at his broad back. She thought about the waitress she used to be scared, passive, letting life happen to her, letting landlords kick her out, letting the cold win. She wasn't that woman anymore. Nico had taught her to fight. "No," James said. Nico froze. "What? No," she repeated, stepping closer. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached out and grabbed his arm, spinning him around. He looked shocked, his defenses crumbling. "You don't get to decide what I need, Dominic Moretti," she said fiercely. "You talk about your darkness, who pulled us out of the snow, who held my daughter when she was freezing, who treated my son like a man, not a burden." "You did." "James, I don't want a normal life if it means being alone," she continued, the tears finally spilling over. "I don't want a house in the suburbs if you aren't in it. You say you're dangerous. Fine. Then keep us safe. But don't you dare tell me I don't belong here." Nico stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked at her as if she were a miracle he didn't believe in. The restraint he had been exercising for weeks snapped. "I warned you," he growled low in his throat. "I'm not scared of you," she whispered. He closed the gap in a single stride. His hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears. "You should be. Because if you stay, I'm never letting you go. You understand, never." "Good," she breathed. He kissed her then. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a claiming. It was the storm finally breaking. It tasted of whiskey and longing, and the promise of forever. James wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, melting into the heat of him. For the first time in years, she didn't feel cold. She felt like she was burning. 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The biting winter was a distant memory, replaced by the golden haze of late summer. The backyard of the Moretti estate had been transformed. Where there was once only manicured, austere lawn, there was now chaos, the good kind. A swing set had been erected near the oak tree. A massive inflatable pool sat in the center of the grass, where Leo was currently trying to drown Silas in a water gun fight. Silas, the terrifying enforcer, who could dismantle a pistol in under 10 seconds, was currently soaking wet, feigning defeat as the 7-year-old sprayed him. "Mercy, mercy!" Silas yelled, laughing. On the patio, James sat on a lounge chair, a book resting on her lap. She wasn't reading it. She was watching Mia, who was sitting on a picnic blanket, having a very serious tea party with her teddy bear, Mr. Penny, and a golden retriever puppy named Buster. "I think Buster prefers Earl Grey," a voice said. James smiled as Nico sat down on the edge of her chair. He looked different. The sharp edges were still there. He would always be a dangerous man. But the tension was gone. He wore a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up his face, tanned from spending weekends outside with the kids. "He prefers chewing the saucer." James laughed as the puppy clumsily knocked over a plastic cup. Nico reached over, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. He kissed her ring finger. It was still bare, but the way he looked at it suggested it wouldn't be for long. Henderson was sentenced today. Nico mentioned casually, his thumb stroking her palm. 20 years. Fraud endangerment conspiracy. And the Russos. Life without parole. The network is dismantled. The city is quiet. James sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. It feels like a different life. That night on the road. It feels like a nightmare I woke up from. It was a nightmare, Nico agreed softly. But it brought you here. He shifted, reaching into his pocket. James's heart skipped a beat. He pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't make a scene. He just held it out to her, his eyes vulnerable and honest. "I didn't buy this," Nico said. "It was my mother's. She told me to give it to the woman who could handle the fire without getting burned." James opened the box. Inside was a vintage diamond ring, intricate and timeless, glowing in the sunlight. "James," Nico said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her shiver. "I can't promise you a simple life. I can't promise that the world won't try to test us. But I promise that as long as there is breath in my lungs, no one will ever make you feel cold again. Will you marry me?" James looked at the ring, then at the kids playing in the grass, and finally at the man who had rewritten her destiny. "Yes," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. "Yes, boss." Nico laughed, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Mom! Dad, watch this!" Leo yelled from the pool. They both turned. Dad. Leo had started calling him that a month ago. The first time it happened, Nico had had to leave the room to compose himself. Now, he just grinned. "I'm watching, kid," Nico called out. He wrapped his arm around James, pulling her close. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the estate. The blizzard was gone. The ghosts were buried, and the waitress and the mafia boss sat together in the warmth, watching their family, ready for whatever season came next. From the freezing depths of despair to the warmth of a love that defied all odds, James and Nico proved that family isn't always blood, it's who bleeds for you. What started as a tragedy on a lonely highway became a legend of redemption. Nico Moretti thought he was saving a helpless widow, but in the end, she was the one who saved him. And that brings us to the end of our saga. I want to hear from you guys in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it the rescue in the snow, the takedown of the landlord, or that final proposal? Type Team Nico if you think he's the ultimate protector. If this story gave you chills or made you melt, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow so I can bring you more epic romances. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next story drops.